Okay, so welcome to Plenary Talk today. My name is Andrew Lee. I'm one of the co-organizers of this conference. I really hope that you have enjoyed the conference so far. But today, it's my great honor to introduce the plenary speaker, Dr. Margosata Barnes-Wetsush, who also goes by Gosia at the 2022 Pronunciation in Second Language Learning and Teaching Conference. Gosia is an assistant professor at the University of Wrocław in Poland, where she also received her doctorate degree in applied linguistics in 2004. My first encounter with Gosia was through one of her articles entitled "The Link Between Pronunciation Anxiety and Willingness to Communicate in the Foreign Language Classroom," the Polish EFL context, which was published in the Canadian Modern Language Review. To be honest with you, I was a graduate student at the time, actually hunting for research topic for my dissertation. And this article really inspired me to pursue my own research agenda, focusing on the impacts of behavior differences in the field of second language pronunciation learning and teaching. So I'd like to take this opportunity to formally thank you, Gosia, for saving me from lots of headaches in finishing my own degree successfully. So I thank you, Gosia, for your work. To prepare this introduction, I did my homework. You might find it a little weird, but from Googling Gosia with her full name, trying to find her from social media such as Facebook and Instagram, I found that she loves so many interesting stuff. I'm pretty sure she's happy to share with you after this talk, but for this plenary talk, it was not really appropriate for me to talk about it. So I decided to look at the Google Scholar, and nothing was more useful than Google Scholar. As you can see, she has published many books and articles and also presented her studies at many different conferences, including TESOL. So I decided to do a quick analysis to have a better understanding of her program of research, because that's my job, as you know. Based on her work, I found several keywords across her work, and these are the keywords that appear across her work. There are several of them, as you can see on the slides. But there are top 5 keywords. The most frequent keyword is pronunciation, obviously, followed by anxiety, foreign, English, and assessment. These are the top 5 keywords that appear in her work. Overall, she's interested in foreign language pronunciation learning and teaching, with particular attention to the impacts of individual differences, such as anxiety and willingness to communicate in English as a foreign language context, such as her homeland, Poland. She's an active researcher at the same time. She's a passionate teacher educator who offers many workshops on second language pronunciation and second language pronunciation pedagogy. I need to tell you this. I received a very explicit phonetic instruction from Gosia the other day because I really want to make sure that I pronounce her name and the name of her institution correctly. She was a very patient and very encouraging, although I was a very bad student. As you just noticed a few minutes ago when I pronounced her name and the name of her institution. There's one more slide. But today, there we go. So today, based on academic profession background, Gosia will give a talk entitled "Show Me Who You Are, Re-examining the Role of Individual Differences in Second Language Pronunciation Learning and Teaching." Given the theme of the 2022 TESOL conference, which is Learning and Teaching Pronunciation in Diverse Contexts, we think that Gosia is the perfect plenary to address the importance of individual differences and diverse contexts in the field of pronunciation learning and teaching. On behalf of the organizing committee, thank you, Gosia, for being here today. She had also a long journey from Poland to Canada. We look forward to your talk. And I hope that her talk inspires some of you, just as her article did for me many years ago. So please join me in welcoming Gosia.
Thank you. Yes. Right. After asking where my notes are, so I hope I'm able to screen them without. So thank you so much, Andrew, for the kind introduction. And please allow me to begin with thanking the organizers organizers for inviting me. I'm absolutely honored to be here, to be able to talk to you from here now today. Thank you so much. And I'm very happy to see you here today. I hope I leave you some food for thought. And if there's anything you want to talk to me about after this presentation, I'll be really happy to. That's anything you want. Okay, so let me move forward. I'd like to show you a little bit of my city. You have a few pictures here. This is the old town. This is a monumental cyclorama painting, which is known kind of worldwide, actually. You can see the cathedral, you can see the stadium. And there are many reasons why you come to Wrocław. This is the University of Wrocław, which is, I think, nice to visit. We are over 300 years old, actually, and we're fourth in the ranking of Polish universities. We have quite many researchers, as you can see, students, and we're quite often chosen by international students. And when it comes to the institute that I come from, we educate future teachers, foreign language teachers, English teachers, and translators, interpreters. And again, it's a pretty popular major chosen by many students. Okay. So another reason why I did come to Wrocław is that besides the fact that Wrocław is a nice city, we have a university. We also have lots of events. One of the events is in May. On the 1st of May every year, we try to beat our own now record of playing Jimi Hendrix Hey Joe. And it doesn't matter if you can't play the guitar yet, because we know that many of you, maybe 70% or 80%, are musically gifted. So you can start practicing for the 1st of May. This year there were 7,500 people. So you're welcome to join the university. Another argument for coming to Wrocław is that we're not that far from Łódź, and Łódź is a place where we have every year accents. And it's a pity to come to Poland just to one place. So it's a good idea to come to Wrocław, and then we can go together to Łódź, or you can come to Łódź and then we can come together to Wrocław. So you're really welcome to join me, and I'll take care of you. Okay, so here's now the very general outline. I'll start with introducing individual differences. I'll say a few words about classifications, and then we'll have a micro perspective overview. We'll have a look at a few studies on individual differences in institution learning, teaching, acquisition, and then we'll kind of zoom in on some students with high and low levels of attentiveness. And I hope I have time for some pedagogical implications, and I'll talk a bit about what still needs to be done in this area. We're in a very, I think, difficult area, because this is differential psychology that we're dealing with. And the first differential psychologists were Plato and Hippocrates. It is actually since then that we know that we differ, well, in all aspects of life. We differ in how we think, feel, what we want, what we need, and so on. And we've known this for ages. In a second language acquisition, it's been over 80 years now that researchers have looked at individual differences. Here are just a few books from the last 2 decades, now published by, I think, well-known publishing houses, John Benjamin, Routledge, Springer, Legal Matters, and Minute. These are the books from this year, last year, and there are also lots of journals that have devoted special issues to individual differences. This is a journal that has Polish origins, studies second language and teaching. There were 2 issues devoted to individual differences. But of course, there are conferences, there are symposia just on individual differences, there are books on particular individual differences, on motivation, on linguistic community, and anxiety. And when I looked at these books from the end of the 80s, and I was trying to find individual differences and pronunciation, it was difficult to find anything. Now the situation is different. We have a chapter on individual differences, on intelligibility, on fluency, on accentiveness. So we're going the right direction, definitely. And there's still lots that needs to be done. Why is this important? Sorry. Okay, sollten Derby, says that individual differences have been found to be the most consistent predictors of L2 learning success. No other phenomena have come even close to this level of impact. So definitely individual differences determine the final success. Some time ago, we would look at how learners are similar to each other. Today, we rather look at how people differ and how we need to approach different people to help them. And it also affects obviously the tempo, the pace of learning, not just the final success. Okay, and it determines the way we learn. Okay, we all come with some personal baggage, and this determines how we get involved in the learning, how learning proceeds. So there's these three kind of aspects: rate, route, and final success that are determined by individual differences. And the more we know about these individual differences, the better can we help our learners. Okay. Let's have a look at a few definitions. This is pretty challenging, even for research scholars, because again, we're entering a field which is an interdisciplinary field. So actually, it's a good idea to cooperate with psychologists, for example. But there are also lots of inconsistencies, even in defining the constructs themselves and classifications. There are also numerous measures, and this makes it really difficult to design studies, to conduct studies, to compare different studies. So no wonder not all of us, many of us, want to deal with this particular area, but we need to really dive deep into this matter. Okay, this is one of the definitions from 2005. What we said, they are enduring personal characteristics that are assumed to apply to everybody. They are stable. They are systematic. 2005. You could please just try to remember that. We'll come back to this definition later on. The classification. I remember when I was a student, we would look into this classification. Rod Ellis says that there are affective states, beliefs, there are general factors. And these lead to strategies that students choose and eventually to particular language learning outcomes. Okay, but then a few years later, we have other classifications, and everybody comes with his own classification. So there's a little bit of chaos, and it is a bit tricky. You can see motivation as a personality factor in Brown's book. Then Johnson said cognitive style is a personality factor. Anxiety is completely neglected by some researchers, so it is a bit tricky. Okay, let's have a look at a taxonomy that has been suggested by Zhang in 2009. External factors versus internal factors. External are those that are influenced by the concept of language learning. So we have native language exposure, we have quality and type of pronunciation instruction, and then there's just a question that I have. I'm not sure. I understand that native language is indeed in a context, in a particular context, but it is something we are also kind of born with. So I do understand that some researchers consider it more like an internal individual difference. The ones that we really call individual differences are those internal ones, right? Sometimes you can come across papers that are about individual differences, but actually it's about exposure, it's about mental residence and so on. That's not really an individual difference to me, okay? There's something missing here, maybe we should add social, psychological factors, maybe willingness to communicate is missing, and many other things. Again, learning strategies are among the individual differences rather than an outcome. But still, it's pretty, I think, clear, and it goes nicely with what we all know, that success is going to be determined by both internal and external factors. We still need to get to know which of them are more important than the others. Okay, it's difficult to say which individual differences are more important than others because it's like a chain reaction. First of all, we have exposure. We have different, we can have different quality and type of instruction. And then we have success. And this relationship is moderated by individual differences, okay? So it's not that an individual difference simply determines, but it depends on there at the beginning, okay? So individual differences are moderated variables. Some of them are dynamic. Some of them are interrelated with and shaped by other individual differences. Some are shaped by external factors. And if we look at a more contemporary definition of individual differences, it's different. Now, Grinsky and Weiss says they're dynamic, they change over time. They change in response to other individual differences and as a response to the context. Remember the earlier definition where Zoltenberg said it was stable? Okay, well, my question is, are all of them dynamic? Are all of them equally dynamic? Okay, and maybe we should add the word some are dynamic and others are not. Because is personality also dynamic? Is working memory that dynamic as motivation? Okay. All right, back to this picture, and I just want to make, I just want to add that we really need precision here because what do we mean by external factors? Well, if we write something or if we read a paper, we need to look carefully if the paper is about a study that was on second language or in foreign language context. There's going to be a difference. Is it about informal or formal teaching? Is it about a course of pronunciation or is it about an integrated course where pronunciation is just one of the components? What methods, what approaches, what techniques we use? This is going to be again going to be important. And then on the other hand, we have the result. Are we interested in accentiveness? Are we interested in fluency, intelligibility, comprehensibility? How are we assessing the students' comprehensibility, intelligibility, accentiveness, and so on? So this all needs to be very precisely read by us, let's say, and again, if you read something, you need to pay attention. If you look at some studies, for example, accuracy, so related more to accentiveness, when it comes to accuracy, some studies show that L1 background, motivation, onset of learning, length of residence, L1, L2 is all important. But when you look at fluency in L2 context, it's a bit different. And when we look at pronunciation accuracy in foreign language context, it's again different. So we cannot simply generalize, okay? So this time there's aptitude and motivation rather than experience-related factors. And it is challenging. It is challenging because when you carry out a study, when you conduct a study, especially with experimental design, you cannot look at too many factors, okay? Because this is action research. You can't do too many things at a time. It's also difficult to isolate the factors, and at the same time, you want to see the interconnections. So it is really challenging. We still don't know sometimes how individual differences are linked to one another. There are people doing some more so then you're looking at interrelationships. That's what we want to do. It's very challenging and very difficult. We would also like, I think it's also useful to look at information processing, the stages of information processing. So which individual differences determine which stage, the input, the central processing, or the output stage. And these answers can help us make pronunciation structure effective. Okay? I cannot talk about individual differences in pronunciation with ignoring the study that you know very well. Okay? So let me just remind you, Sutter, personal Sutter. First, there were 12 individual differences determined. Then, after reanalysis 4, we know that after the study, pronunciation structure was discredited. Oh, sorry, discredited. But we know that pronunciation instruction was not operationalized properly. It wasn't actually operationalized at all. The sample was small. The focus was only on acceptedness and not really on comprehensibility. So the findings have to be viewed with skepticism. But this is a study that really took into account lots of individual differences. The first one we all know of. And there are lots of studies on motivation, on self-perceptions, on age, on length of residence. I'm not going to talk about these things. I'm going to talk about things that are maybe a bit more controversial, either are very important, or maybe you haven't heard of them that well yet, leaving you with some food for thought. Okay? This is something that you know very well, so I'll just go through it quickly. One of the cognitive factors that obviously is very important is working memory. And just remind you that the two most important components are the central executive and the phonological loop. And phonological loop again seems to be the most important because there we have phonological short-term memory that has been found to determine lexical stress, tactics, and mental categorization, also perception, accuracy. Okay, and working memory affects all the stages of information processing: input, central processing, output stages. It also determines how well our students notice corrective feedback, and this is very important. Okay. It determines how well we can control our performance, and this depends also on the learning context and the learning conditions. whether it's formal, informal, explicit, implicit. And this goes nicely with what we know about exceptional learners, meaning those that have native-like proficiency, have achieved native-like proficiency levels also in pronunciation in a relatively in a relatively short period of time, so quickly, and after puberty. So they usually have excellent memory. This is what makes them unique. Okay, we know the example of Julie. We also know that philological kind of aptitude is different from the other aptitudes, different talents. And let me refer again to this Polish writer, Józef Konrad Korzeniowski, who had an excellent mastery of prose, but his accent was very heavy. Right? So there's something else, a talent to mimic dialects, philological talent is something different than the other aptitude and talents. And memory is absolutely crucial. Let's have a look at another factor, another cognitive factor, cognitive style. Chapelle says life is too short and too complex for us to ignore the concept of cognitive style. What is style? Style is just the consistent and rather enduring tendency or preference to do anything or everything. And if you think of cognitive style, it's a preference, it's a habit, it's comfortable way, it's natural way, usually of perceiving, conceptualizing, analyzing, organizing, and recording information. And we need to make some things clear. Revealing a style is not being unable to function in another manner. This is important. Another important thing is that most cognitive style dimensions are not really affected by external factors. We may learn new abilities, we may learn new strategies, we may adjust them to a particular task, but it doesn't mean that our style has significantly changed. You can stretch it a bit, but it will change from analytical to holistic, for example. Okay? This is something that we can read sometimes, that we can change them with the style. It may change, but not significantly. Okay? And there's lots of taxonomies. Some have even suggested there are 30 of them, but they will overlap. You can see the dates here. This is psychology. This is a long time ago. But in education, there are some which are really found to be important. I'd like to note that it's a multidimensional construct. Some of our dimensions are shaped by affect and personality values and others. One of the differential psychologists from Wrocław, like working with, said that cognitive style mediates between motivation and emotional and cognition and development. And when it comes to SLA, there was some interest in the 80s and 90s, and I think maybe the baby was thrown out with the bathwater a bit too early. We know that it relates to the aptitude strategy use. And I think it's really important for pronunciation learning. There are a few dimensions I have to look at. And I will now focus on one of the field dependence and dependence. Okay. What is field dependence and dependence? It's a dimension that affects, first of all, the input stage. So people who are field dependent, they have a preference to perceive the field as a whole. And field independent individuals have a preference to perceive the field as separate, as consisting of separate elements. Let's do a short test. If I ask you what you can see there, many of you will say that you can see the forest, okay? And then you can see the trees. Others would say, I can see the trees. That's in the forest, okay? This is a huge oversimplification. And earlier we would have a so-called frame test or the adjustment test. Today we use a Google embedded figure test. Okay, well, you would have a complex figure. You would be looking for a simple figure and a complex figure. I don't know what the figure is for, complex one is for. Okay, in a particular. Okay, now it's a global aspect of human functioning. What does that mean? That it's not only about thinking and perceiving, but also about how you perceive yourself as a separate identity. And it refers to what defense mechanisms you use, okay, what strategies you use. So it is related to personality. It's relatively easy to measure, as opposed to something to work in there, okay? And it affects the input stage, because people who are field independent could break up a field, easily separate parts of it, and they can steer and control their attention more easily than field dependents. And they have a different approach to ambiguous material. They easily and spontaneously introduce structures, and pronunciation is ambiguous material, and it needs to be structured, okay? And field dependence, they may ignore, they may not take in stimuli which are uncomfortable, which are unpleasant for them, okay? So they use these defenses. They do not allow those uncomfortable and pleasant stimuli to enter their consciousness, and they will put aside. It affects the central processing state as well, okay? Hear me? No? Okay. And it is also related to fluid intelligence. And it also has to do with the slower, with the inhibitory control. So field dependence are slower at changing and creating new stimata. The older ones get in the way. And it affects the output stage because we need to conduct several simultaneous processes. And most of the attention is focused on meaning while you're talking. It's difficult to focus on pronunciation. And field dependents have a slower pace and smaller range of these parallel operations. And they also have problems with keeping feelings and thoughts separate. So this is also another thing. Field dependent individuals, they also have this strong tendency to be a separate identity. They don't need, they're more autonomous, independent of the others. They're very much aware of their needs and feelings and attributes. And field dependent individuals, this is more like a with person orientation. They need approval. They are attached to others. They rely heavily on external sources of reference. There are other, as you can see, characteristics of field-dependent people, which are really important if you teach. Knowing these things can really make teaching them more effective. They're very sensitive, for example, to negative reinforcement. They like learning which is full of humor and if you allow them to use fantasy. They like material which is socially loaded, for example. They prefer it in the form of group. They don't like competition that much. They prefer cooperation. They do not benefit that much from recasts because they don't notice these things by themselves that easily. So at some point, I wanted to find out whether a teacher can actually help them go through these stages of information processing. So offering them offering them pronunciation instruction would help. It seems that the teacher can make the material less ambiguous, can structure it nicely, can offer this scaffolding and be this external source of reference, which they need so much. Can help them with the interpretatory habits, so can help them with the output stage, and also take care of all the negative emotions. And Andrew has been talking about this. This is my PhD thesis, 2004. I wanted to find out if indeed there is a relationship between the level of field dependence and pronunciation accuracy, and whether there are significant differences between accuracy or non-accuracy of field-dependent learners, middle of the road learners, and strong field-independent learners. And then I wanted to do the same thing after they were provided with instruction. Okay. And then the last research hypothesis was: is there a significant, or I assume that there was no significant difference in the progress that students would make if they are provided with pronunciation instruction. So there were 96 students involved in this study. They were highly motivated. They have never been to an English-speaking country for a long period of time. And earlier they had no instruction on pronunciation. There are also instruments I use, but here the most now just know that I use a figure test. And a few production tests where I focused on accuracy. It was individual word reading, dialogue reading. And I repeated, the test was repeated, the production test was repeated after the treatment. And there you go. At the beginning, when they did not receive any treatment, field-dependent learners were much better, significantly better. Here you can see the result of the ANOVA and also the result of the least significant difference test. The only non-significant differences between the middle of the roaders and field-dependent learners, but otherwise, field-dependent and field-dependent learners did differ in their pronunciation accuracy. Okay, and correlation, 0.30. Okay, when I repeated the test after a year, okay, after 60 hours of pronunciation instruction, field independence are still better. And the significant difference is still the same pattern as followed. Okay, so once again, the difference between field dependence and independence is still significant. But the correlation is a bit slower, it's a bit lower, sorry. And the progress, when you look at the progress, it turns out that there are no statistically significant differences. So when I gave the students instruction, when we practiced, when they got to know, when their logical competence changed, they did as much, or even they even did better. They even did better overall. This is the progress that was made. They did better than the field independents. And it wasn't because the field independents, it wasn't because of the ceiling effect. They really could progress. So with help, they really could benefit, they really could move forward much better than when they were just exposed to the target. Maybe we have to ask the same questions about how important this individual differences when it comes to comprehensibility, intelligibility, fluency. Whether it's the same for formal and informal context. Which specific approaches, techniques are particularly helpful for field dependent and field independent. So that was one of the cognitive style dimensions. Another one is tolerance of ambiguity, which I think we have all come across, and we know what this is all about. It's the capacity to perceive and process information that deviates from the pattern. People who show a low level of tolerance of ambiguity, for them, ambiguous situations cause inner conflict, anxiety, frustration. They do not take in information, and they rely on their initial prejudices. What's an ambiguous situation? It's a situation which is not full of novelty, complexity, and solidity, and lack of structure. And usually when we read in all these SLA books about tolerance of ambiguity, we find information that it's better to be tolerant of ambiguity. Okay? They're better at implementation, they use new strategies. Now, some people may have difficulties not with the material itself, but with the context of learning. But can the lower levels of anxiety be beneficial for pronunciation acquisition? Well, new stimuli will be particularly captivating and salient for those who are not tolerant of ambiguity. They may be not accepted first, but maybe with time they can be finally taken in and processed in a more detailed manner. The strangers, they consciously or subconsciously push towards more careful and detailed analysis. Okay, and once they are accepted, maybe they are better memorized, maybe they are better treatment. Okay. And it's also important that low ambiguity tolerant individuals are less willing to accept their mistakes. So it may be different when we talk about comprehensibility and when we talk about accentedness. Okay. The disadvantage of being also highly ambiguity tolerant is also important because there is this risk that they do not process information thoroughly. They just do it kind of superficially on the surface level. Okay. So again, some time ago, I looked at whether there is this relationship between the level of ambiguity tolerance and tolerance of ambiguity. You can have a look at what was done. Again, we have text reading, web reading. Most of the studies here are conducted on English majors. They are communicative where they come. So it's difficult to look at comprehensibility. They usually aim higher, and therefore many of these studies are rather on accepted between comprehensibility. This is the context that I kind of research. Okay? And I was surprised to find out that it's just the opposite of what we can read in SLA books. This time, when it comes to accentedness, those who are less tolerant of ambiguity were more accurate pronunciation than those who were tolerant of ambiguity when they were not provided with instruction. Okay? Personality, again, something you know very well. I'm sure you know the Big Five. Remember that they are independent of each other, openness to new experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. They're also related to motivation, cognitive style. And usually we say extroverts. Extroverts are the ones who do better. They are resistant to stress, less anxious, have better short-term memories, are outgoing, and therefore they expose themselves to more language. They use more effectively social strategies. Actually, the classroom is a natural habitat for them, also the natural surrounding. And some studies have shown that they're more fluent. Okay? Of course, it depends on the quality and quantity of input that they get, but generally you find out that they're fluent. But, mind you, extroverts also over-rely on guessing and may easily get satisfied with skills that are superficial and unrefined. They are more distracted and more impulsive. They more easily get bored. Okay? They have problems with long-term memory and reflective problem solving. They have this happy-go-lucky attitude to learning. Okay? So they prefer not too much work. Okay? So this may be an obstacle. Hard work and dedication may be an obstacle. They may quickly become disheartened. So they need to be strongly motivated by a teacher, or they need to have their own strong motivation to really get involved in hard practice, systematicity. So this is something that I think hasn't been researched, because maybe, again, if you look at accentiveness and introversion, extroversion, maybe it's the introverts who actually do better than extroverts. And usually when we read that we assume there is a stereotype that it's better to be an extrovert. What else? Extroverts are also those, for example, who are found to have lower levels of competence than extroverts. This was on Croatian students some time ago. Okay? So do extroverts outperform introverts in accentiveness, whether they offer pronunciation instruction practice and when effective filter is kept low in the classroom? I don't know. I don't know of a study that has dealt with this. But I do have an limited see. When I zoom into my learners, there is something there going on. Anxiety. Darwin, if we expect to suffer, we're anxious. But later on, we can find out it's an anticipatory state of active preparation for dealing with effect. Okay, so now we're with the effective practice. Let's have a look at anxiety. It has these three basic dimensions. The cognitive one has to do with how we approach and process situations that we think are threatening to our egos. Okay, and if we think that we are not able to cope with the situations, we get anxious. Okay, people who are anxious, they project unsatisfactory performance. They focus on identifying those potentially threatening situations as stimuli. And these negative projections and awareness of physical potential lead to worrying. They're very much aware that they're worried. This leads to a vicious circle. Okay, and you all know these physiological symptoms like my dry mouth, which is like it's not when I'm thirsty. Okay, it's not when I'm thirsty. And I talk a lot, and I don't need to drink every single minute, so it's because of the anxiety. But you may be sweating, heart pounding, maybe observed, cold clamps, and so on. We know these things, and they're pretty easy to observe in the students. Okay, and there are these behavioral symptoms. We just escape, we avoid situations that are threatening, that are dangerous to us. Irritability, impatience, but also impediment of motor behaviors, for example, articulators. So this is important for us if we teach them. And again, it affects all three stages of information processing. I'll just jump forward because we don't have time, but it affects the input, the central processing stage, and the output stage. And we have the concept of language anxiety, which is specifically the feeling of apprehension that we feel when we use and when we learn a second language, a language that hasn't been fully mastered yet. And Elaine Horwood says it's related to communication apprehension, fear of negative evaluation, test anxiety. This is how she came up with the idea for language classroom anxiety, and this is a test that she came up with. She's the mother, right? I would say of the concept. Many people are aware that she's part of it. It's dynamic, language anxiety, but it is also strongly linked to personality. So if you are simply more anxious, generally, right, this is the trait of yours, you will be also more anxious in your management. And we all feel some anxiety. Elaine would say that we don't really talk about positive. There was this concept of facilitative anxiety. It's not really anxiety then, it's something else, but anxiety usually has negative results, and the most anxiety-provoking skill is speaking. All the studies show that it is negatively correlated with results in learning one language. And today we know that it's the third most important factor. And of course, it has an influence on all performance. It affects the richness and the appropriateness of vocabulary and grammar structures, vocabulary and grammar, but it obviously affects pronunciation because it determines all three stages of information processing. And there are studies that show that when we're stressed, our pronunciation gets worse. Okay, Horwood wrote that students who are stressed, they have problems with discriminating sounds. Okay, Zuzatov, she found out that her students, her Bulgarian students, if they were highly anxious, they had problems with pronunciation, with intonation, performance. Okay, and there are studies that show that if you're anxious, you have problems with using pronunciation strategies and tactics. One of my colleagues. It's also important that it's self-efficacy that is even more important than actual pronunciation, okay? So what you think about your level, this is what makes you anxious even more than your actual level, because it's about self-perception. And as I said, it's a vicious circle. Students are aware that their pronunciation is impaired. For example, when we speak in front of a class, giving a speech in front of their teachers, and students' awareness of poor pronunciation may make them even try even harder to generate this, generates even more anxiety, leads to even poorer pronunciation, and it goes on. Somebody has to help stop this. So, okay, and some time ago, again, I came across all these different types of anxiety, but I didn't come across pronunciation anxiety, although there was so much said about how students feel embarrassed about their terrible accents and about how important pronunciation is because it's part of your identity. And we all know that it's a very emotional aspect, right? And then when I had classes with my students trying to help them with their pronunciation, I could easily tell that some of them were more anxious with particular tasks. So on the basis of all this, I suggested this construct of pronunciation anxiety, which is related specifically to the feeling of apprehension caused by pronunciation, right? And it has this typical symptoms called physiological symptoms. And I thought, okay, relying on what I could observe among my students, let's have a look at these four kind of building blocks, okay? And I thought, okay, probably pronunciation, self-image. So the beliefs you hold about yourself, the way you look like, the way you sound like, and whether you are ready to accept your new self. Maybe this is going to be important. Then pronunciation, self-efficacy, and self-assessment. So how do you perceive your ability to master a new phonological system? And how do you perceive your level of pronunciation? Then the third component, fear of negative evaluation. So the apprehension caused by thinking that probably you might be negatively assessed by others because of the way you speak. Okay? And attitudes towards the sound of the target mouth, and also beliefs about how important you think anxiety, how important you think pronunciation is for communication, and how easy it is for particular learners in particular languages to progress with it. And these building blocks may depend on the learning context and the cultural background. We'll have a look at that. It is really different depending on the cultural background. At some point, when I was looking for these components, I did different things with my students. I always did different things. Here you can see adjectives that students who are highly anxious provided me with, and I was about to them. Just write whatever you think when you think of adjectives. And they were very negative. Okay, post-ill illness, which differed Polish and English. Yeah, childish funny, nobody speaks that way. Okay? Okay, and then at some point I also to draw something. And those are drawings of a very highly anxious student. And these are he says a tongue or trapped between the teeth, well, dead eyes, everything is still negative. Tears, was it? Tears. This is also so these are the images of highly anxious students. Okay? How about the adjectives of the ones who have very low levels of anxiety? Have a look. Beautiful. I love the sound. Pictures, variants, yeah. Okay. So very positive attitudes towards the language. Okay. And then I came up with a scale, 30-item scale, where there was there were a few statements about general oral apprehension, and then there were these components or statements to these four building blocks. Okay? I'll just move forward if you want to see it, talk about it. I had a look at the internal ability, and I was a bit worried about this. But then I thought, okay, I put together beliefs and these attitudes, and these are different things. So these should be kept apart, but the overall is satisfactory. And then I also did a retest reliability to see if it was okay, not bad. And then, again, Andrew mentioned this, let me just go quickly through the study. I wanted to see, okay, let's look at these interrelationships. Is this important for willingness to communicate? And willingness to communicate is really important, because it is the most immediate determinant of health use. It refers to how eager we are, how ready we are to initiate or join in conversations. And according to Peter McIntyre, there are these more enduring factors and more situational factors in motivation, anxiety, is somewhere among between these individual and doing practice, because together with perceived ethical competence, it shapes state communicative self-confidence. And I wanted to find out again whether there is a link between these two concepts, how strong the link is depending on the number of interlocutors involved in speaking, which goes nicely with the type of task, actually, because if you have a speech, there's a lot larger group. If you have a conversation, and how does that go with the degree of acquaintance with speakers? So are they your friends? Are they people you don't know? Or are they just people you know but you don't necessarily like? So is there a difference there? And does that also differ depending on the efficiency level? So this time they were non-English majors, none of them were English majors, students of different majors. And I used a measure of willingness to communicate based on Krosky, 12 items, Likert scale, and there were these two criteria used, so the degree of acquaintance with the interlocutors, number of interlocutors, type of speaking task. They had to agree, disagree, right? How willing, they had to say how willing they were to perform different activities. And then I used this measure of pronunciation anxiety, which I talked about. Very important, okay? It turned out those who are highly anxious really did not do that well when it comes to they were not that eager to join communicative tasks in the classroom. Low anxiety students significantly different there in their level, and 0.60 correlations with that. And then if you look at the differences, depending on how well students know the other students, it also mattered. Okay, the more people, the more anxious, right? The less willing they were to communicate, and the relationship was stronger. And also the relationship was stronger in the case of the intermediate students, maybe because they thought that they should be already good enough and they assess themselves at a lower level than they ought to be at. Okay. How are we doing with the time? Okay. Let's have a look at a few students. Let's zoom in on the cognitive, affective, and personality profiles of a few students with low and high levels of anxiety, low and high levels of acceptance. And also, I wanted to find out what helped them to progress in their pronunciation. So just before I arrived here, I was in Norway. I talked to 12 students. They have never ever been to an English-speaking country, and they are after a semester actually in pronunciation instruction. They read a passage which was evaluated on a 9-point Likert scale accent test. I also asked them to fill out the group of figure test, the tolerance of ambiguity test, and measure pronunciation anxiety. And I also talked to them, and this is how I found out about the personality. I didn't want to overburden them with all these tests. This is the problem. You want to see how they are related, but you can't just, get to these people and ask them to be writing and filling out tests with you. I also asked them in a questionnaire, in an interview, what they thought helped them. Okay, so they were recorded and then transcribed and then analyzed interviews. Okay, and this is a student who, received 1 point before the training and then half of a point after the training when it comes to her accentiveness. So she was considered to have a low level of accentiveness. No attention was paid to pronunciation when she went to school. Okay, she went to these language camps, but she said they made me more fluent, but they didn't affect my pronunciation, I think. Okay, but otherwise she has a perfect combination of individual differences to be good at pronunciation. She has high aptitude, she's musically gifted, she has a good level of choice of ambiguity, she's not field dependent, she's a middle of the road. She's an introvert, and she has a very good memory. Can we just listen to what we have about introversion?
I'm definitely more introverted. Do you think that helped you in pronunciation acquisition or learning? I think the way that it did help me is that I like to spend time alone, and I spent a lot of time just listening to people speak on my own on the internet, and I did that instead of like hanging out with people. or something. So,
Okay, remember what I told you about introversion and extroversion? That was pretty surprising. Okay, and then she has a very high motivation. Listen to this.
yeah, I'd actually say that pronunciation is my favorite part of learning a language because I find it really fun to be able to like produce new sounds. And sometimes I just listen to like there are these videos of just random words for beginners in different languages. And sometimes I just turn on a video like that and just repeat the words in different languages that I'm not even learning because I like to.
Just one more about the R sound. I don't know if you were native speakers of English are aware of this, but English is simply
I like the R sound. It's like deep and yeah, I like the way
and when you compare it to Polish,
the sound of the American accent just kind of stopped. In general, like there are like in Polish you have a lot of hard sounds, and in English you don't really get that. Like the words just flow into each other, sort of.
okay, right? So, and she also has a low level of pronunciation anxiety. She doesn't need feedback, she says. She doesn't need feedback, maybe just to motivate her. She has a high level of competence after the phonetics course, but didn't really need it that much. And she uses strategies. She's a very conscious strategy user. Okay?
I like the R sound. It's like deep. Like if I'm watching a show or something, I will stop the show and just repeat a line and do that.
Okay, so she has strategies. She would sing actually that this was a strategy. This is another participant also doing very well, but this time it's not a combination, it's not a perfect combination. This time he has, he thinks he doesn't have, he's a man, he doesn't think he has a talent for foreign languages. He doesn't speak any other foreign language. He says, no, I can't play an instrument, I'm terrible, but he's been assessed pretty high on the acceptedness scale. He says he is anxious, but he's coping with it. He says, I am anxious and I don't want to feel this shame. This is what's pushing him to work hard. Again, he's an introvert, okay? He has very high motivation. And he doesn't need feedback. He knows exactly where he's going, what he wants to do. He says phonological competence helps, but only with hard work and only with hard practice. And again, he has strategies that he uses so very, very consciously. Let's have a look at some students who are assessed with very high levels of accentedness, but they progressed. 3 points, difference. This girl was a visual learner. She had an average memory. She was not reading gifted. She was foreign development model for development. She was strongly field dependent and introvert. Very high pronunciation anxiety. At the beginning, very low motivation, but afterwards, after a few classes of pronunciation, of phonetics instruction, it went up, okay? And earlier, she didn't use any strategies, but after the course of pronunciation, after 2 classes of pronunciation instruction, she started using her own strategies, and she said what helped her was pronunciation instruction, the atmosphere, feedback, okay, and the fact that she could work in smaller groups. Okay, something that is okay. So it seems that what we have to remember about when we're teachers is that motivation, attitude, and needs are the most important. Okay, they are affected also by external factors. For example, by the teacher. Okay, they change, they fluctuate. Okay, anxiety is absolutely the other most important, very important factor that again is shaped by outside factors, by external factors, and they also are related to one another. And it is also these other individual differences, centuries, that determine, for example, anxiety, but they're not that much determined by external factors anymore. And it is us, we have to adjust to the students. So there are things we can change, but otherwise, in case of some individual learner differences, we have to offer learner-centered instruction, okay, knowing how these people, what these people prefer. So, of course, we have to know what they really want. But again, remember, we as teachers also shape the students' motivation. And there are some internal factors that shape students' motivation as well, okay? So like extroverts, they need motivating tasks. Learners with anxiety, they need structure because otherwise they will be demotivated. Anxiety, it will not do any harm to anybody if you take care of anxiety. Tammy Gregerson says, it's better to assume the presence of anxiety and build safety nets than to miss negative affect. Okay? There's lots you can read about how to deal with anxiety. Self-achievable aids, build good teacher-student rapport, respond to raise self-perception, correct writing, and so on. Okay? When you give instruction, we know that instruction helps, but does it help in an equal? Is it equally effective for all the students, or do we have to adjust it to the students' individual differences? And we can adjust it. When you raise students' logical competence, well, ask yourself the question: which approach am I using? Am I using authentic materials? Am I scaffolding? Am I guiding the students? Can the students work in groups, discover technological rules, or am I giving them the rules? Okay, because they may get discouraged if you're giving them everything already in a format. What techniques am I using? Am I referring to their sensory modality preference? Am I giving them challenging tasks, or are they not that challenging? Okay. Am I using games, puzzles, and so on? Am I giving am I partialing the bits of information? Okay. When you practice, again, some questions you can ask yourself as a teacher. Okay. Am I using artificial gymnastics? Are you giving the student a chance to see you individually? Are you not following just one pattern, the PPP model or TBL model? Maybe not all of them like performing a task without being introduced first, earlier to a new implemented form, for example. Are you teaching them strategies? Okay, because maybe the highly anxious students, those who have no aptitude, need these strategy training more than others. When you're providing feedback, are you using recasts? Okay, but are they equally effective for all the students? Because maybe some students need more explicit focus on mistakes. So there are other questions you can ask yourselves. Okay, is negative feedback not too frequent? Is negative feedback not provided in front of other students? Okay. Are the students' self-perceptions raised? Are learners helped to develop self-assessment skills? So you have to get to know the learners. You have to use variety. You probably have to individualize whenever possible, teach your learners strategies and allow them to pick the ones that are effective for them and encourage self-reflection. And I think we have to look at the macro perspective. We have to also conduct action research to see what's going on there among these individual learner differences. So micro perspective, selecting particular individual differences. And we have to carry out meta-analyses, comparing studies. And then also maybe do some ideodynamic, use some ideodynamic methods. Okay, so that would be the micro perspective where you can look at anxiety, motivation, enjoyment, where students are performing particular tasks. And then there's also lots you can do when it comes to technology, because I don't think we have actually had a look at whether this is effective for the students, okay? Because they're left kind of maybe more on their own, and maybe they need a little bit more contact with the teacher, at least some of them, okay? They need more personalized feedback. This is just a thank you for my students for being mentioned. And thank you so much for being here with me. Sorry for taking